There are reports out saying that China knew about the coronavirus and waited for almost a week before declaring it a pandemic. Apparently, the city of Wuhan, the epicenter of the virus, hosted a massive banquet for thousands of people, and millions of people began traveling through for Lunar New Year celebrations. To talk more about it is political journalist Brian Lilley. Now, Brian, Chinese President Xi Jinping warned people on the seventh day, but by then it was a little too late.
Yeah, you hear about the seventh day. Often that's a good thing, right? You think biblically, seventh day, that's a good thing. No, in this case, it was not. He warned people on January 20th that there was a pandemic, but 6 days before that, the Chinese government had been informed, oh, it looks like we're headed towards a pandemic. This is bad news. It was in the middle of Chinese Lunar New Year celebrations. And look, many of the first cases in Canada, be they in Ontario or in British Columbia or in Alberta, they were people who had gone home. They're Chinese Canadians, they'd gone home. It's Lunar New Year, they're going to see their family, they're going to see their friends. They don't even know what they're walking into, Hal, because there are all these things going on in the area in and around Wuhan, and the Chinese government has not told them. We had heard before, we had heard previously that the Chinese government had underplayed the issue of how many people had been infected, how many people were, had contracted the virus, how many people had died. We had heard all of that. What we had not heard until this story from the Associated Press, where they obtained internal Chinese government documents, they did not explain that, you know what? They knew about this 6 days before they told the public. There were banquets in Wuhan with literally tens of thousands of people. As many as 3,000 people were infected. That's the estimation during this time. And then many of those people turned around and said, all right, I'm going home. I came to see my family. They're going home to Toronto. They're going home to Vancouver. They're going home to Calgary. Guess what? They spread the disease worldwide because the Chinese government lied.
Brian, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the Chinese government simply can't be trusted when it comes to sharing information on COVID-19 or anything else such as building Canada's next generation wireless system.
Yeah, Mike Pompeo, the U.S. Secretary of State, holding a media teleconference, and one of my colleagues was on that conference call. I got to write up the story about it, but questions about, okay, should China be held to account for what happened? And what do you say about countries like Canada that want to allow Huawei to be part of their 5G? And he just said, you know what? If you want to have Huawei as part of your 5G, you can do that. But American intelligence will not go over networks that are not secure. And networks that have Huawei as part of them are not secure. That was a very clear message. He wasn't being threatening. He wasn't being dictatorial. He was just saying, if that's what you want, you can have it, but you won't get American intelligence. Now, why is this important? Well, American intelligence actually gave us some of the first warnings about the coronavirus. American intelligence, through the military, informed our military, which informed our public health agency about some of the very first instances of the outbreak and the very first facts that this was not what the Chinese government was saying. So we want to be part of that, whether it's for pandemics or for military alliances. There are so many reasons that we want to be part of it. And allowing Huawei into our system is detrimental to our well-being. Now, TELUS, they are the first company in Canada to start rolling out their 5G network, and they say they want to make Huawei a major part of it. Why is that? Because Huawei is cheaper than everyone else. And Huawei is cheaper because Huawei is backed by the Chinese government. They are, hand in glove with the Communist Party of China. So, are they able to undercut any other competitor? Absolutely. But as we found out during this whole pandemic, in Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who keeps talking about saying he wants to make Ontario the manufacturing heartland again for everything that we need in an incidents like this, like personal protective equipment. He says, do we want to really say we're going to, go to China for masks because we'll save 5 or 15 cents a mask? Is that what we want to do? Well, that's what we're going to be doing with our 5G network. And the Trudeau government has been dragging its feet on this. They haven't said no to Huawei, but they haven't said yes. In the meantime, we've got the two Michaels being held over in Canada, Michael Kovrig, Michael Spavor, and nothing is being done about them, but they are inextricably intertwined with the Huawei story.
Brian, let's talk a bit about those masks. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney announced recently that Alberta was handing out millions of masks on Ontario to help you guys out, many in BC as well, in Quebec. Why is it that Alberta has such a surplus? And some Albertans I've talked to said, we're a little concerned if things run a little dry here, but you say there shouldn't be an issue.
Well, Alberta's doing what the federal government should have been doing. And you and I have talked about this before, the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile. That should be there for the entire country to draw upon. And unfortunately, it's not, because the federal government kind of let it dry up under the Trudeau Liberals. They just said, we don't see the value in this. They brought in experts from places like Emory University and Johns Hopkins, and they just said, you don't need all this material. You don't need to have all this on hand in case something happens. Well, it turns out we did. The reason Alberta has so much is that Alberta, unlike most provinces, where there's the provincial government and then there are regional health authorities, and I couldn't even tell you how many we have in Ontario. It's such a big province geographically and population wise. But I can tell you next door in Saskatchewan, I think they've got 3 or 4. In British Columbia, they've probably got about a dozen. And all of these regional health authorities do their own purchasing, or in some cases, depending on the province, the hospital does its own purchasing. In Alberta, they do the purchasing for the entire province. So that's why Alberta has more dedicated supply chains than other provinces. That's why they've got a month's supply when some of us have days or weeks. And that's why they're able to say, you know what, we're good. We've got a month's supply. We can give you a week or so. We can spread that out across the country and help you out when you're in a difficult situation. And we're confident that we are going to get what we've ordered. As one Alberta official said to me, we've got supply chains that have been going on, relationships with manufacturers, not distributors, but manufacturers that have been going on for more than a decade. And they know that at the end of this, Alberta will still be there to buy from those manufacturers. Do you want to anger that big of a customer and say, well, so-and-so is offering me a couple bucks more, we'll give it to them? Well, Alberta figures that no, they're in a good position. They'll be able to buy this. They'll still get the shipments that they're expecting. Other provinces, other parts of the country, they're not so sure.
Brian, a big story across many countries has been the death toll mounting at long-term care facilities, including here in Canada. You've had some Bob Cajun in Ontario. We've had him at Mackenzie Town in Calgary. Many seniors are dying in these long-term care facilities. And the feds say they're going to increase wages in many of those centers to help a lot of the staff.
Yeah, this is the latest announcement from the federal government. That, and if you make less than $1,000, I can't remember if it's $1,000. I believe it's $1,000 a month, and your income has been impacted by COVID-19, that they will step in. But if you work in one of these long-term care facilities and you're making $2,500 a month or less, they're going to be topping up your wages. Now, this is going to be difficult because these facilities, regardless of where you live, are provincially operated or provincially regulated. So in some cases, the province actually runs them. In some cases, municipalities do. In some cases, they're for profit, but the majority of the funding comes from the provinces. So the feds are going to have to work with the provinces on this and try and boost the wages. The reason for that, Hal, is that whether we're talking about British Columbia, where our first major outbreak happened in a long-term care facility, or we're talking about the place in Lethbridge you just mentioned, or there's several in Ontario that we could talk about, all of them are places where you've got a certain amount of full-time staff that are there day in and day out, and then you've got people that, okay, they work Monday and Tuesday in this location, and then Thursday and Friday, they work in a different location. And the concern is that it's those workers that move between locations that help spread the virus. And to you and I, we may get a little bit of sniffles. We might get a cough. We might feel under the weather. Worst case scenario, we're going to get some chest pains, heavy breathing, all of those things. But to people in long term care facilities, this can, and as the statistics show, it will be deadly. These are the most vulnerable people in our system. Now, I've got to say that Canada, on the whole, is doing better than many other countries, whether we're talking about long term care facilities or elsewhere. But if you're one of the families that's lost someone in a long term care facility, that's cold comfort to you. And you just want to know that we're going to do something different to try and stop this.
Well, U.S. President Donald Trump has talked about potentially opening up the American economy once again very soon. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says that may not be happening here for quite some time.
Yeah, and the only comfort that those of us that want to get back to normal can take from us is that he said weeks instead of months. So is that 3 weeks? Is that 4 weeks? Is that 6 weeks? Now, British Columbia is ahead of the curve. Alberta and Ontario were a little bit behind the curve compared to British Columbia. So what does that mean for us? I can tell you that here in Ontario, the provincial government has extended their emergency declaration through to May 12th. And I've been speaking to some epidemiologists who say, you know what? By the middle of May, we're probably going to start to being in the okay region. I know in Saskatchewan, right next door to you, they've got far fewer people in hospital, far fewer people in the ICU than expected. I believe that's the case in Alberta as well. I can tell you that's the case in Ontario. We're hitting about 27% of what the models that were released just a couple of weeks ago claimed we would be at. So if we can keep it at that level, then at a certain point, what we'll be able to do is start releasing things on a case by case basis, industry by industry, region by region. Because, as you know, living down in Lethbridge, it's going to be different than in Calgary or in Red Deer or in Edmonton. And in Toronto, well, that's kind of the epicenter for Ontario. But in Ottawa, there's, less than half a dozen people in the intensive care unit with COVID-19. So why shut down the entire economy in Ottawa because you've got less than half a dozen people? Things like that. So it will be on a region by region basis that things start to return to normal. And yet officials will still say that there are some things that won't go back fully to normal for quite some time, perhaps a year or more.
Brian, COVID-19 has hit Canadians very hard. My daughter lost her job in Hamilton, and now a new poll says millions of Canadians could soon be declaring bankruptcy.
Yeah, about 1.2, 1.3 million people are saying that if things don't improve in the next 3 months, they're on the verge of bankruptcy. And then when you add in the people that say they're close to it, it becomes, I believe the number is about 4.2 million, say, it could head in that direction. These are not good numbers. Unless you're in the bankruptcy business, these are actually horrible numbers because it means, it's everything from everyday workers to small business owners to the local hair salons just saying, you know what, I'm done, I'm out, I'm shutting down, I can't do it anymore. And we talk about the economy and people say, well, why do you care about the economy? Why do you care about the stock market? The economy is not the stock market, Hal. We talked about this last week. The economy is the ability of you and your family to pay your bills, me and my family to pay our bills. It's everyone's ability to look after themselves. And if we keep shutting things down beyond when we need to, we start seeing worse outcomes in terms of our economic situation. That's what all of the political leaders are looking at right now.
Last week, the Prime Minister wrote to the provinces to look into bringing in the Emergencies Act. Brian, the Premier said no thanks, but many argue it's not a bad idea. Explain what that would actually look like if it was implemented.
Well, I think there's a lot of confusion around this because we always hear in the United States there's a big flood, there's a tornado, oh, there's a state of emergency declared. Well, and we say, well, there's something bad going on here. Why won't you declare a state of emergency? Well, in Canada, the Federal Emergencies Act doesn't do a whole lot except take provincial powers and give them to Ottawa. And the provinces, be it Premier Kenney in Alberta, Premier Horgan, I can tell you the language he used on a phone call with the other premiers, Premier Ford, Moe, Legault, they all said, we're handling this. We don't need you to take over our powers. Please don't do this at this point. So the prime minister heard the premiers. He backed off. He said, okay, if you've got this, I won't do this at this point. I really think that the push by a lot of Canadians to say we need to enact this is based on the fact that they don't understand what this means. This is simply taking provincial powers and giving them to the federal government, which is even further detached from the lives that you and I are living in our respective jurisdictions.
Brian, we only have about 30 seconds left here. Before I let you go, you were at a recent event featuring a lot of star power, including actor Ryan Reynolds, hockey legend Hayley Wickenheiser, and Ontario Premier Doug Ford. What was that all about?
Well, Haley Wickenheiser had, put out a tweet saying, "Hey, look, I'm willing to go out and pick up PPE, personal protective equipment. If you've got it to donate, I'll drive to you and pick it up." Ryan Reynolds saw that and said, "If you donate to Haley, I'll give you bobbleheads or movie paraphernalia or autographs." Doug Ford, Ontario's premier, saw that, and they were having a bit of a collection drive this past Saturday. He showed up with 32,000 masks from Ontario's new car dealers. They donated them. He dropped them off. They FaceTimed in Ryan Reynolds. It was a bit of a love-in as they all talked about the great things they were all doing. But you know what? Each of them, people can dismiss this as photo ops, but each of them lending their name, Hal, has their respective audiences saying, "Oh yeah, I can help." And maybe your company has 250 masks that you forgot about that you bought for something, and you can donate it. It's that sort of thing. That's why this matters, and that's why it's good, and that's why I would applaud it no matter who was involved.
Yeah, joining forces for a great cause. Nice to see. Political journalist Brian Lilley joining me once again from Toronto. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Hal.